before our sightings began, we moved in here June of 2013. Later that summer, beginning of fall, my husband took my two sons out, got 3 children, and he collected all the dead trees in the woods they could find to build them a fort, like a treaty. There were a lot of them. They were surprised how many dead trees they found and broken trees that were just, there for the taking. We would go for walks in the woods, and it was always kind of unnerving, I guess you could say, going through the woods. It always had that eerie presence to it. I didn't know why. And we'll fast forward to this year. In June, I don't know when in June, in the middle of June, my kids came running inside and said there was a weird dog in the yard. And come to find out, there was an incredibly managed coyote in my yard. And animal control came, and they tracked it into the woods. There's an old logging trail. It goes about a quarter mile before it dead ends. And they followed it in the trail most of the way down and put it down. And they left it. Another month goes by, and it's the first week of July. And he didn't tell me, but my son came running in the house explaining that there was Bigfoot in the yard. And he was kind of shrugged off because my son has always talked about Bigfoot since he learned how to talk. He was just always interested in the subject, so it wasn't uncommon for him to say such things. A couple days later, I finally asked him why he kept talking about it so much, because he wanted to take his tablet outside and get pictures, and he would just run out to the porch, and before he'd go down the 2 steps to the ground, he would stop and look around. And it was just kind of weird to me, so I asked him why, and he told me it was because he had seen Bigfoot in the yard. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And you could just tell looking at his eyes he was being sincere. So I made him take me to the location. He was about 10 feet from our porch on the ground looking at bugs, and he heard something, and he looked up. He said it sounded like a large stomp. And he looked up, and there was Sasquatch taking berries off of our blackberry bush, which was less than 200 feet away from him. And he watched it for a few seconds, and then he stood up and took 3 steps closer to it. Still didn't notice him. And he took another step. He said he stepped on a leaf or something, and it made a noise. And the Sasquatch turned and made eye contact with my son. And then my son dropped his jaw in shock, and it did the same. And then after 3-4 seconds go by, it started walking at my son. He said it was fast, but it was walking. So he turned around and ran to the house, and when he got up the steps and at the door, he turned around, and it was now closer to 70 feet away from him and still walking at him. So he ran in the house, tried telling his dad and brother, got a drink of water, and then ran back outside, and it was gone. And like I said, it was 3 days later, and when I went out there, I took the camera with me, and there were no berries on that branch. I made him go stand where he was when he saw it, and I held up a stick, and I made him stop me when it was high enough, and it was at least 9 foot tall. I then realized that, I'm like, I can't see any other signs. I really want to believe you. I kind of believe you, but it's hard to believe you. And then I realized that the part of our yard where we had mowed was a walking trail, and it was that like a human, kind of, but it had a much bigger footstep, and it went around a dead tree and disappeared into the woods, instead of being on the normal path we take into the woods, which enters in the corner of our yard. And I was like, well, your evidence adds up, but it's hard to believe. Another month goes by, and on August 21st, unfortunately, my mother-in-law passed away in New York State, and on the 23rd of August was my husband's birthday, and I really wasn't able to sleep on the 23rd. It was 6:30 in the morning, it was lightly raining, and I got up and turned the coffee pot on and then stepped onto my porch, and I took 2 steps, and behind my house, about 20 to 30 feet behind my house is where the tree line starts, and it's thick woods from there. And from a tree to the tree line, something was just, I don't want to say scream or yell because it's not the right term. It inhaled and then exhaled child while either stomping its foot or pounding on its chest. And it was incredibly loud. After it did it once, I said, what the hell is that? And I took 2 steps closer to it, and I leaned on the railing and just stared at the location it was coming from. And I couldn't see anything. And we have a no-kill dog shelter next door. The yard is completely fenced in, and all of the dogs just went insane. It wasn't normal bark. It was, they were after something. They were scared, all of them. And I went inside, and I made my coffee, and I just thought about it for a while. I realized everything my son said was true, and that there were Sasquatches in our backyard. It was a lot to take in on top of everything else I was dealing with at the time, we were dealing with. And the next day, we had to, in the middle of the night, we had to leave to go to New York for a week. And when we came back, my husband was sitting on the porch late at night, and he heard what he described was like a sheep howling to another one on the other side of the hill. And the one that he heard yelling close was right behind the dog pen. So the next morning he was convinced. And that prompted us to go into the woods with the family unit. The next day, my husband took a baseball bat with him, and he knocked down some trees, and things got pretty uneasy. He just broke a couple of the dead trees that were there, and I just wanted to go. I wanted to just get the kids back home. I wanted to go. And this was close to sunset. Finally, we turn around and head back. Like I said, the trail's only about a quarter mile, and my husband decided to pile some sticks up in the walkway, and then he urinated on them. And on our way back, the trail bends when it parallels our yard, and I noticed through the woods something big and black running over the ridge. I could only see the top part of it, and it was running fast, and it was running towards the back side of our house through the hill. And I told my husband, and my husband took off running after it. And all he saw was big trees, silly, big trees swaying like they had been knocked. At that point, all of 3 of my children were with me, and my oldest son was in the back of the pack. We turned around and saw one running away from us on the trail. He just said it looked like an incredibly large, hairy human, and it was running away.
And as it was running, the trees were swaying as if it was maybe grabbing them as it was going by?
The ones my husband saw, yeah, he said it was like they had been knocked onto, or something had definitely grabbed on while it was running by. But the one my son saw was running in the other direction of the trail where there were no trees right there. It was kind of a whole trail for a ways. And the next week, the weekend, because it was on a weekend we did that, the DJHO came to our house. We walked through the woods, and we showed her multiple arches, just weird tree structures we had found, because there's countless of them, countless arches back there. And she confirmed that it definitely appeared that we had them. She showed us more signs that she had noticed that I hadn't noticed before. And then we had a wonderful visit, and she left. And the following weekend, I went out with my neighbor. I told my next door neighbor about it, because I forgot to mention this, but in July, when my son had told me about it, I took the kids for a walk in the woods the next day to show them, there's no Sasquatch out here. We would be able to see signs. And we came across that coyote carcass that had been put down by animal control. And it had been ripped apart, which isn't a big deal, because coyotes will rip things apart in that manner. But approximately 100 feet past that on the trail was another pile of dog skeletons, but this one had a collar. And that was really unsettling. And that was the day I was like, okay, I can't prove you too enough out here right now. Let's just go home. And so I told my neighbor, because her dog at night will just go insane sometimes, and then they'll just go silent, and they'll whimpering and knocks behind them, and it gets pretty intense behind our house sometimes when our yard's parallel. So I told my neighbor about it, and I told her, I think that it's disrupting your dog. I had found these bones in the woods. So she believes me, but the other neighbor did not, which is fine. And she went into the woods with me, and everything just went eerie, silent, and you could hear something on the other side of the hill, and it was just an uneasy walk. But she had a gun with her. I wasn't concerned at this point. And we cut through the woods and we came to a trail where my husband had the pile of sticks. And right next to it was a tree, a small tree, probably 10 foot tall. And 50 inches up, it was completely snapped off and overhanging the walkway right by the pile. And that was unsettling. And it was completely intact. It looked exactly how we left it the week before when the BFR researcher went through the woods with us.
Amanda, was that dog skeleton that you found, the one with the collar, was your neighbor missing a dog at all?
She was, but it has nothing to do with that particular dog. But she didn't recognize the collar, and none were reported around here to have been missing, which is not uncommon for this area. There's dogs everywhere. But it was very strange to me to see the collar, and especially next to the other pile of dog skeletons, just the way its bones were dispersed, and they were next to weird tree structures. There's huge logs back there, huge logs that are just lifted up and placed into a Y of a tree, and they're everywhere near the dogs, with quite a few of those.
Was that tree snapped over the pile of sticks where your husband urinated?
It was about 6 feet.
Pile?
Yep, it was about 6 feet in front of it.
And you had mentioned to me also that you guys have seen them up in trees around your property.
Yeah, that's after all of that, my husband and me started staying out here, and we came to the conclusion that they needed to know we were in charge of our kids and our area, but we wanted to make peace because obviously they're intelligent. They can be incredibly dangerous, but we didn't have fear of them. Now, the day it walked at my son, at first I was petrified at the thought. Then I realized if it wanted to, it could have easily, and it didn't. It didn't even run at him. It just made my son realize you don't walk towards them, which he was trying to do. Every night they'll howl or yell. They mimic owls a lot. Dogs sometimes. You'll hear motorcycles and ambulances and birds in the middle of the night coming out of the woods, and just howls and yells and knocks, tree knocks like crazy, and from 3 different areas typically, and they'll get closer and closer. My brother-in-law brought us some furniture a couple weeks ago, and we put 5 new dressers on our porch, and we all went for a walk in the woods right as it was getting dark. And nothing really happened to us when we were in there, but the next morning when I came out and I looked down, there's a part of right below my porch where there's no grass, where the water runs off the roof, and there was a big heel print in it, and then I realized that there was another footprint as well, like crushing my flowers that are right there, and it was right next to our porch. The footprints I found the day my son told me of his sighting were bigger than my foot by a few inches, but these ones were huge. I've actually got 2 casted footprints from my woods that are 19.5 inches long by 8 inches wide, and they are big. I'm finding at least 3 to 4 different distinct sites back there. My neighbor, when I first told her about it, believed us, but had to find out for her own. So she called some of her friends who are within a mile or 2 of here. One person she called, their woods would technically connect our woods in a roundabout way. A mile or 2 isn't much for wildlife. And he said that he had never admitted it before, but he had seen 4 of them in his field about a year ago. And my husband would stop at the store on the way home, and he's, walking up to people asking them if they believe in Sasquatch and if they've seen Sasquatch. And one night he got really lucky, and 4 out of 5 people admitted it, and most of them lived around here and had seen them. It turns out that there's actually quite a lot of activity, but every single one of them says we don't tell anybody because we don't want to be considered crazy.
How old was your son when he had the sighting?
10.
Okay.
He was 10, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of details he gives. It was picking berries, he describes facial expressions.
Oh yeah, it was an elder male. It was graying. It had patches of gray hair on its chest right above its butt, and its like calves and feet were completely gray. He actually is supposed to have a sketch drawn up of his sighting, and they're working on that right now.
Well, no, I was going to say there's a ton of details that he gives in his sighting that if someone, if a kid was going to make that up, there wouldn't be so many of those details in the story.
Right.
Specific details, He might say, well, I saw one. It followed me. He goes into describing what it's doing. He describes what its facial expressions are, kind of what it looks like, its behavior. I mean, there's so much stuff that he goes into for a 10-year-old. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he was incredibly into it. And the thing is, like I said, he's always had a passion for the subject, and I've actually had to tone it down a bit. And like I said to him, I asked him, I said, would you walk up to a wolf in the yard? Well, no. Would you walk up to a bear in the yard? No. Then why would you walk up to a 10-foot tall Bigfoot? Oh.
And Amanda, didn't he in fact mention that he saw the Bigfoot's genitalia?
Yes. Yes, he did. And I always thought, that was covered by hair is for a lot of, animals, bears, etc. But I guess Sasquatch humans have gravity, they